Hello, I am Sadiku, and today I will be talking about early Asian immigration in the United States. And basically I chose this topic because it's part of my history. So I just thought it was something interesting. So this took place during the 19th and 20th centuries, and some of the questions that I have set up for myself while researching this topic were what were the events that led up to the immigration acts, like the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Johnson and Reed Act, which basically limited the amount of Asian immigrants that could come into the United States. So, like, what were the events that led up to that, and then also what were the cause and effects of these immigration acts. So, just like a little background on this, a lot of Chinese immigrants were coming into the United States, especially during the 19th century when the gold rush was happening. So right here, you can see two Chinese men working, just trying to find some gold. But it is also really important to know that the gold rush wasn't the only reason why they were coming over here. There was also the recent loss of the Opium Wars to England. So a lot of people were just trying to escape that. And as more laborers came, there was a growing resentment from white laborers towards Chinese laborers because there was the whole notion of, oh, they're taking our jobs. And it just really upset a lot of the white laborers, which led to the creation of the Foreign Miners Tax Acts, which the original act taxed any foreign miner, and it was $20 a month. This created a lot of outcry, especially from white European laborers, so it was then rewritten and exempted anyone who was a white European laborer or anyone who had the potential to become an American citizen. So this really just taxed Chinese and Mexican laborers, which in the end didn't work out very well for the government because they did end up quitting because of the Tax Act. And something that's important to look into is the split labor market theory, where it's basically just looking into like hiring cheap labor versus high cost labor, and the cheap labor being like the Chinese laborers. And this is seen especially during the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, where the Chinese laborers did take the cheaper pay, and they also did take the more dangerous jobs, so like working with explosives. And this picture right here is just like Chinese laborers that were working on the railroad. So during this time, there was this idea of the Yellow Peril and Yellow Invasion, where basically it was just like, oh, they're taking our jobs and they have disease. So in this picture right here, this man, like they often depicted Chinese people as like alien-like, and then he's holding opium here, and then a gun, and then he has a knife in his mouth. And he just like killed a woman. So this is just like how they were depicted a lot of the time during this era of Yellow Peril. And this led to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, where it just like limited the number of Chinese laborers who could come to the United States. And then it also prevented them from holding citizenship, or anyone who was already in the United States from holding citizenship. And then right before this was the Page Act of 1875, where basically it just didn't allow the wives of Chinese laborers to come to the United States or Chinese laborers to go back to China. And if they did go to China, then they would basically lose anything and everything that they had in the United States. So with like this resentment and with the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese people were like essentially forced out of society. So they created their own communities, which is like where you see the emergence of Chinatown, like where you, in like major cities. So like New York and like DC and San Francisco, places like that. So right here you see this this market from one of the Chinatowns. But it was just really difficult for them to assimilate to American culture. And they couldn't like own land or marry outside of their own race or obtain education. And during this time, there was also a lot of like riots and lynchings and anti-Chinese legislation that was being put into place. And then there was this court case in Rayaya where basically it said that because Chinese people were neither white nor black, they were not eligible for citizenship, and it left them vulnerable to discriminatory practices. And San Francisco took opportunity of this, and they would tax Chinese people for a lot of things. So like laundromats, and then having burial sites, or if they had too many people living in a building. So a lot of stuff like that. And there was a lot of resentment, and in 1924, the Johnson-Reed Act was put into place. So right here is just a cartoon, and it says, "The great fear of the period that Uncle Sam may be swallowed by foreigners." So there was just like a lot of people that didn't want immigrants to come into the United States. So the Johnson and Reed Act basically limited the amount of immigrants that could come to the United States, but it completely barred Asian immigrants from entering the United States completely. And like part of this were Japanese laborers in Hawaii. And one of like the differences between Japanese laborers and Chinese laborers was that they were actually recruited to work in Hawaii, but they still faced discrimination. So like they couldn't have citizenship or own land, or they couldn't be reunited with their family. And then eventually in 1965, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Immigration Act of 1965, where it basically like repealed the immigration acts that wouldn't allow anyone to come into the United States, and it allowed 120,000 visas from the Western Hemisphere, and then it gave 170,000 visas to the Eastern Hemisphere. And then in 1978, it was changed so each country could have 20,000 visas to come into the United States compared to what it was before, and just basing it off of the hemispheres of where they were from. And even like with these acts, they were like Asians were still seen as a danger to America, and instead of it being like a labor problem, it was like a health and safety concern. So there was like a lot of fear of criminal activity and terrorism, which basically opened the door for deportation for criminality. And it's gotten like this sentiment has sort of switched over the years, and you can now see it in a lot of immigration from Latin America, which is just like very sad. So yeah, thank you for listening to my presentation.